basketballs get practiced with for like a year before they even make it into a game, because
Oh,
it's
okay.
the opposite. They want them to be smooth and like really well broken in, where football is like kind of the opposite.
Oh, that's really crazy. I didn't know
Yeah.
that. So you don't sell a lot of basketball leather, would be my guess.
Not as much
As
as
football.
football, but that's market size, and also because yeah, I mean, because they want the balls broken in. That's part of it too.
Since this was your topic, why don't you introduce it?
There's maybe sort of this idea at times that as things get more modern, in many ways they get better. And that's not to say like that the good old days are like the best, but I do think that there are certain times and certain places where these older technologies hang on, and there's a reason that they do it. And I was thinking about that. So I specifically started thinking about football and like sporting goods, because there's a big divide there, and there's a fairly large market for leather, like footballs and basketballs and baseball gloves and like all that stuff. But there's also a gigantic market for the rubber stuff and the composite stuff too, and they have different use cases. And that's an interesting one for basketball, especially, which we can talk about maybe in a little bit. But I was just thinking about how there's a benefit to the leather in that product still, and there's a reason that it works better in many different ways. Specifically thinking about football, and I just thought it was, and I sort of stopped thinking about it because I just thought we would just talk through it, because because there's a whole different there's like a whole bunch of different ways to approach that and think about it, from the leather all the way down to like just like natural fibers, like wool and cotton versus all like the polypro stuff. And then with wallets, I was thinking about it from like the thread standpoint, from nylon versus cotton or the other natural fibers that you can use for wallets. And
Sure.
I don't know a lot about that, but I thought we could talk about that too. But yeah, I think it's a gigantic topic, and it's probably going to be very opinion laden and not very scientific, but we'll do our best.
All right. Yeah, I guess when you presented this topic, I was kind of honestly, I was just like, whatever. I don't know. But now that you describe it in terms of sporting goods, it makes a little bit of sense. And the story I'm thinking about, which you might have been hinting towards, was the basketballs. And actually, right now, as we're speaking, I believe round 2 of the finals is going on. And I don't really have a horse in that race, but timing of this is interesting. But I recall a moment about a decade ago where your dad was a big Shaquille O'Neal fan. And the reason is I think he sort of single-handedly pushed the effort to keep leather for the basketballs in the NBA. And it's my understanding that the NBA is the only league that actually has leather balls. I might be mistaken there, but I don't think college does leather balls. And apparently with Shaq's, leading the the charge there, because he liked the way that it was a little bit more difficult to play with, for some extent. It has a different feel to it. That was my recollection of it. Is that how you recall this with the basketballs?
Yeah, I don't think it was necessarily just one player. I think that you're talking about when they switched the ball over, like basically overnight, from the leather, like traditional panel ball, to like it was like it was like 2 octopus like patterns. They fit together. So it was only like 2 panels, and it like was fingers. And I think that a lot of the players were not happy with the switch. Well, because it happened quickly, but also because it's a completely different ball. I mean, it wasn't as soft, and it didn't break in. And I think they were having issues, and I'm not a good basketball player or a terribly large basketball fan. So we should not talk about basketball for too long, but that they were having trouble because the balls were hard, with hurting their fingers and their hands because they pass so hard. And
I see.
And yeah. So I think there were a lot of players that weren't happy with it, because you get to that level, and it's a performance product at that point. It's something that you've spent your like whole life like working up to playing at that level with that product. But
On that point, though, I was thinking about that. Is the switch mid-season or at a single season with short-ish notice might have been pretty stark for pros that had been playing in the league for a bit. But I bet you people that came from NBA high school playing with non-leather balls didn't have so much disruption, would be my suspicion. But I recall there were other things like how it gripped against the backboard. So they would have to sort of relearn most of how the ball interacted physically with, everything. I don't know. When you talk about durability with leather, I think that's one of the key features, and then how it sort of wears in a gentle and often more pleasant way, where some of the man-made materials, not so much breaking it sort of just fails. But I don't know, like with a basketball, are they playing multiple games with the same ball? Is this even a relevant thing for them? Yeah. What's that? What's going on there?
So it's like the opposite of football, where in football, each team is bringing, like a whole slew of balls to the game, and they've prepped those balls, and each team has their own quiver, I guess. And whoever's on offense, they're providing the ball because the quarterback is, in charge at that point. And I think that I've read this rule like 10 times and I always forget it. They're allowed to switch out balls at certain points. And I know the kickers have their own ball too. So there's a lot of different things going on there. And basketball is the opposite, where I think that the home team chooses the ball, and maybe they have one alternate, and like that's it. So
and the balls play with that ball multiple games in a row, or
because the basketballs get practiced with for like a year before they even make it into a game, because it's the opposite. They want them to be smooth and like really well broken in, where football is like kind of the opposite.
Oh, that's really crazy. I didn't know that. So you don't sell a lot of basketball leather, would be my guess.
Not as much
as football.
But that's market size, and also because they want the balls broken in. That's part of it too. So
yeah,
I think it's like the opposite.
Well, what was the point you wanted to make with this when you were thinking about these topics?
Well, I was just thinking that from that standpoint, from like a jumping off standpoint, where you've got leather that's contacting your hand a lot, and the leather at that point is advantageous because it wicks moisture. So even if it gets wet, it gets heavier because it's absorbing moisture, but doesn't get slippery. So like that's a big plus, where something like a rubber or composite is going to shed the moisture, and it might look newer, longer, but after a while, it's going to start to break down. And that leather football, even though at like the highest levels they're playing with those, pretty fresh balls, they still get better as you use them, and they look better and they feel better. Where the plastic, rubber, composite is kind of the opposite. Where out of the box is kind of the best it's ever going to feel. So I think that's an interesting distinction. But there's one example that comes to mind. Do you remember the XFL, the football league?
I do.
So they came out and they had a black football, and they made the football leather waterproof, and so they were making it more plastic like at that point, and they couldn't throw, the ball like wouldn't spiral because it wasn't balanced right. I think I remember hearing that. But also, as soon as it would get wet, they couldn't throw it. It would just like slip out of their hands because they're trying to throw it really hard or catch it when it's going really fast, and any moisture that was coming off of your hands or the field would get on the ball, and the ball would just become slick. So that wicking component is important, and I think that's, you can sort of extrapolate on that from a breathability standpoint too, when you start to think about other leather goods like footwear and jackets or whatever else. But I just think there's a lot there. I mean, there's so many materials choices in the world at this point, from like full vinyl to whatever, a vegetable tan piece of leather, which I guess would be on sort of on opposite ends of the spectrum if you were to think about a jacket. But There's just a lot. There's a lot there. I don't know. What is your experience with? I mean, do you have any experiences with where you feel like something that's plastic or leather performs so much better than one or the other?
Actually, yeah. With some like like windproof running stuff, um, I prefer that where it doesn't necessarily penetrate. Um, and honestly, like I think for balls, like I mean, I'm not a serious player of any sport, so if I were to throw around a football or play with a basketball, honestly, like the material selection doesn't affect me so much, other than I appreciate the look of the leather stuff a little bit more. But that was a question that I had in my head while you were speaking was, if leather is, you're describing it as so much better. And of course, we are complete leather shills.
Yes.
As you're describing that as being better, why doesn't every football team or every basketball team use a leather ball? Is it just that simply the price is much higher than a non-leather ball? So it's not worth it for those at that level?
I think that's most of it. Yeah.
Yeah, they don't even care that it's better.
Well, I just think that, I mean, you like what you said. I mean, I'm not an elite football player either. So
Really?
I think there's a point at which it starts to make a big difference, and then there may be at some points it doesn't. I mean, like if you've got a football team with a bunch of 9-year-olds, I don't think that the leather football at that point. I mean, it's bad. It's still better, but I don't think that like those 9-year-olds are being like, oh man, this. If only we had a leather ball today. It's raining. We'd be putting up some more points. But so I mean, you have to take it for what it's worth. But the performance side of it and like that side of it isn't the only reason either. We've talked about this before too, about the sustainability of something. And I mean, I have football. I was moving recently and I found a football that had my name like stamped on it.
Nice.
That was probably from 1990, 1991. It's old. And it, of course, it wouldn't hold air. But I sent it back to Wilson and they put a new bladder in it and they sent it back and it's great. It's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, when like the only sport that I'm interested in these days is running, to be honest. And this will tie it into footwear for most of our audience that's interested in footwear. I go through running shoes, man. I mean, you can't resole them. At least I'm not aware of any resolable running shoes. It'd be kind of an interesting proposition. I don't know if you'd want that because I know that there's a lot of like fancy foams that go inside for the footbed and all this. In the midsole, they have these like, every time I go to read about a different running shoe, it's like space technology for your foot and whatever. But I go through running shoes every, I don't know, 6 months, right? And I have so many leather boots and shoes that are just maintaining that I can't wear them all. So it's sort of like opposite issues. But I mean, certainly the non-leather footwear is lighter, so there's a little bit of advantage for running for me. They, they're so porous, it's just mesh, right? So I guess it's much more breathable. So I suppose there are applications where it makes sense to use a non-leather thing. Back in sports though too, a sport that you're more familiar with, and I know you and your dad are much more accomplished than most in, is hockey. And I think about the goalies' pads and look at old pictures of like the 70s and stuff. And they had those cool studded leather pads. And obviously they moved away from that. Is that simply a weight thing, you think? Or was the leather not protective enough?
No, I think it was just a weight and a cost thing again.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like pros could pick whatever they want.
Yeah.
I was looking at your notes here for the show, and it reminds me about my running shoes again. We're talking about the difference between, or the trade-off between the elasticity, temper, flexibility of the material and its durability. It's the same thing with those running shoes, right? So the parts that crack are plastic, of course. I mean, there's no leather on my running shoes, but it cracks because it's rigid and it doesn't have any flexibility. So I think that's probably the reason you don't see many dress shoes that are plastic, right? Otherwise they'd be everywhere.
Yeah, I did some reading on this, and then I realized once we were going to be talking about this, and I did more reading, how I wasn't equipped to fully talk through this. So I'll talk like at a very high level about like what I read, but so you're right with like plastic or plastics or polymers or anything like that's like petroleum derived like that. Like the really durable stuff is are the really, really hard plastics. And those are strong and last a really long time, but you can't make a shoe out of them because they don't flex. So in order to turn something like that into a product that can move and flex, you have to add something else to it. And when you start to do that, that's when certain things, there are trade-offs. It's just like with leather. Like when you have a really soft piece of leather, like it doesn't emboss as well. I mean, that's not a direct comparison, but just to say that there are trade-offs. And I think that it starts to happen pretty quickly with the plastic. Like when you start to add stuff in, they're like plasticizers, I think they're called. I should have looked that up too, but the trade-offs happen, and they're pretty stark, and they happen pretty quickly in terms of degradation in longevity, I guess. And even with that, there are certain things that you can't really mitigate, like in terms of with heat and UV and different exposure to different chemicals or elements. Plastics are susceptible in that way, and leather is too, but there's a different set of parameters in which the leather gets affected versus the plastic or plastics.
I guess I'm not so knowledgeable about plastic for footwear. Again, I'm thinking about my anecdotes with the running shoes. They do seem to be pretty UV resistant, as well as the threads that I use for my manufacturing are bonded nylon. And one reason to choose that type of thread is it doesn't change color in the light. So maybe that's a certain type of plastic. I don't know, but I think you get the flexibility in those shoes, the non-leather shoes, the plastic type shoes, because they've essentially made a mesh out of it. It's just a bunch of fibers that can move. So there's some ability there as opposed to just like a hard sheet of it, which would never move. Yeah. I guess I'm kind of confused on this topic as a whole. Is like, what are you trying to prove here? Is like, I think most people already know like plastic doesn't necessarily look super awesome, and they kind of know, there's a reason that I would choose it for my running shoes, but not my wedding shoe, Like, where are you standing on this? Because I feel like the answer is there's places for both of them. It just depends on the application, right? You're not are you trying to convince somebody of something here?
No, I don't think so. Okay, so I guess as I started to think about it, there are all of these different products that are out there, and some of them are plastic and some of them are leather, and that's fine. And you can make the decision based on what you're doing and how much it costs and how it looks and all that stuff. But I think that it's interesting to think about why one or the other lasts longer in a different scenario. It's like why does a plastic why is a plastic or vinyl like raincoat better than like a leather jacket?
Yeah.
And why is a leather football better than a rubber one? And that's not to say that both can't be useful, but just sort of like, so what is it about each of those materials that suits it better for one thing or the other? And that was, I guess, what I thought was interesting. And then when I started to research it, I was immediately over my head. But I think conceptually we can still struggle through it. But
I'm kind of starting to feel like the two things that we got out of drawing the comparison from footwear to sporting goods might be part of the answer. It seems like it might just simply be a cost and mass, like how heavy the thing is, would be a reason to not choose leather if you want lightweight and inexpensive. As a raincoat, for example, plastic tarp would get you dry, certainly doesn't look great, might not last a ton of time. I don't know. Gets the job done.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think that
It's light, super light.
yeah. I think that as I was thinking about that too, so what is it that makes one different than the other? And I think that also the technicality of one thing versus the other can get lost a little bit. I think that that there's a perception that if you want something like that's very technical and advanced like that, it's plastic, and that's generally I think true. But I think that there's also a lot of sort of technical aspects, or at least components or concepts that are built into leather that make that last longer in certain applications too. And yeah, again, this is like another just whatever you want. Pick what you like and do what you want. That's another one. That should be the name of the steps.
Full grain podcast. Do whatever you want. It's all nuanced.
Yeah.
Well, with football, is a really good example, as you were saying, as like football. I mean, it has to have some performance characteristics, and it's my understanding that you're the only tannery that's able to achieve the level of performance that the NFL requires. So if it was such an easy material to create, then every tannery would do it and you would not be making it because they would have figured it out. So there are some performance characteristics in football. There, if I recall correctly, there's 3 key ones that people can get maybe 2 of the 3 and not all 3. So one of which is the pebble pattern, the texture. The other is the strength of the leather. It needs to be strong enough to be able to not rip as they flip the ball from inside out to right side out. So it takes a lot of force to turn a football. And then the third is the tandem tack, which is I signed a document that I'm not allowed to divulge much information about the tandem tack, but there's a secret formulation that makes the leather sticky. And some of the tanneries can get 2 of those 3. You guys have all 3. So there's certainly some performance characteristics that are, I don't know if you call it high tech, but it's certainly not something that's easy for one to achieve. Otherwise, they would have done it.
With leather, there are a lot of, sure, when you make a piece of plastic, there's a bunch of additives that can be changed. But I think it's also a much narrower, and this is maybe me being ignorant of the science, but I think it's a narrower sort of product category where with leather, you've got all these different hide types, and maybe that's like a little bit of a crutch that leather has, where you've got all these different hide types and all these different natural inputs. So the range of things that you can make is so wide and so gigantic, and I think that's a technology thing. I think the plastic, even since like I've started paying attention, I think the plastic has gotten. I mean, just look at like the faux leather, like the faux stuff. It looks not bad on the shelf. I mean, at the very, or in pictures, it looks not too bad. But as soon as you do anything to it, you start to sew it or manipulate it. It doesn't behave the same way. But that's certainly better than it was, 20 years ago. So,
yeah. And then there's the environmental component to all this, where I was listening to another podcast today, and it reminded me of something you keep saying is like, the best way to be green is to not do anything at all. But it's not really an option for any business to not do anything and still have a viable thing, create products that people want. Just comparing leather and plastic in terms of what it's going to do in 100 years from now, the chain of chemistry that's happening in each of those, what's the biodegradability look like for polymers versus, collagen that's been tanned with chrome, for example? Or is chrome a good place to start? You want to start with veg? Both?
whatever.
Yeah.
I think that this is the stuff I was reading, and I was like, oh, this is way over my head. Like what? Because I think that going the sort of the the reaction, like the knee jerk reaction to say like, oh well, leather goes away faster than plastic, like across the board. And I wanted to say that, and I think that that's mostly true, but also that there are a lot of different. I mean, they've been innovating with plastics for years now to try to make things that are more biodegradable. So that's one place I think the plastic has actually changed and made a lot of improvements. But a lot of those biodegradable plastics are also not as strong and don't last as long for the same reasons that they biodegrade faster. So it's just another trade-off there. And I think that with leather, you're starting with a more natural material, depending on the leather and how it's tanned and what's in it. But
let me put a yellow card up here on the word natural, because like, I don't know, petroleum's kind of natural. I don't know, what does natural even mean?
right, I mean everything is natural if you go
Right.
back far enough. Uh, but when you take something like when you take a petroleum distillate and you turn it into a plastic grocery bag, like that's not really the same thing anymore. Because you've broken it down to its constituent parts and sort of like reorganized it and then put it back together. And leather, you do that with leather too, but I think it's a little bit different where you take a hide and you're taking everything out of it and then kind of purifying it and removing all of the things that will spoil, which I guess is the same as purifying, and you put it back in. So I think it's a little different. Also, it's a process that has been done and could have been done for thousands of years versus plastic, which is a more modern, just requires more stuff and that's not to say that if you mistreat a piece of waste in either category that it's going to be you get like a freebie, but
Yeah, but like for me, it's like natural. So what? Like organic. So what? If you tell me like, hey, this banana is organic, and this other one's conventional, I would say, so what? And then I would just want it to taste better. To be honest, like if I'll pay triple if it tastes like a great banana. Like when I was in Italy, we talked about this. I ate an orange off like a street cart, and it was the best orange I've ever had. And I don't know if it was natural or organic. They didn't tell me. It was just the only orange that they had. Right.
that's a different example though, because I bet when you were at that streetcar, I bet they had like oranges and like maybe one other option. Because they're like, this is what's in season. This is what we've got. You didn't go into the like, you know, whatever grocery store here, and they have like every fruit. Like they've got raspberries
All the time.
and like dragon fruit, like every day of the year. It's like that's not like there's a reason it doesn't all taste good all the time. It's because you're like, oh, these blueberries are from Peru this week. Like it doesn't like that's not conducive to like
I don't think you can.
like
I
a
just, I guess
sweet
what I'm
blueberry,
saying, I hear you. And that's a
yeah,
good point. I think what I'm saying is like, you can tell me leather's natural, but I just say, so what? You know, I think we
yeah.
need a real argument of like why you should really care. But maybe we can get to that. But I think maybe we've exhausted that here. And do you have a sense of how long chrome salts bound to collagen fibers take to degrade in a landfill, for example?
I don't think you can give like a solid answer on that because I think it's so dependent on what it is and what it's next to, and like something that's in a landfill and or something that's in Louisiana versus something that's in northern Canada. It's like a completely different. It's a completely different
Right.
cycle. So, but yeah, I mean, natural, I guess, is kind of like a word that's easy to throw around as sort of like a catch-all. But, and I specifically, for right or wrong, I default to thinking about our stuff, which has more old-fashioned kind of stuff in it. By that I mean tree barks and tallow and beeswax and materials that are more likely to return back into the system more quickly than something like a PU coated split which is basically half plastic and half leather.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe my approach to this is a little bit narrow.
Yeah,
Because,
it feels like we
yeah.
don't have a thesis for this whole topic other than it's interesting to examine,
Yeah. Well, I think that it's interesting if you look at product life cycle and impact, which we've done before, and this is very, I guess, obscure, but it's interesting that something can both last longer if you take care of it and also biodegrade faster, which I think is it's sort of an oxymoron, I guess, where plastic is like you take care of it and it doesn't really matter how well you take care of it, but then it takes forever to break down. So it's just a different different thing.
The crumb stuff is a question mark for how long it takes to break down, but certainly tree barks in lieu of crumb salts will break down faster, as well as the olive tan stuff you do. I mean, of course, using a quote unquote natural material like an olive leaf will eventually turn into dirt faster than a polymer.
Yeah.
So I think that's interesting. I think the more critical thing that you've hinted at to me before is essentially how many times you're going to wear the thing before it goes to landfill. And like I was saying with my running shoes, it kind of bums me out when I wear through them. I actually wear them like farther than they're supposed to go. And then even after that, I like have such a hard time throwing them out. I'll just wear them to like cut the grass or junk around shoes, go paint something, so I'll try to like really squeeze them. But you run enough and you run through those shoes pretty quickly. And like I said, the leather stuff I'm certainly not running in, but I am wearing leather boots and shoes most days. And I have never thrown one out. I've only given them away to people. So I think there's some value there to discuss, but it's still, you're talking about a $400 pair of shoes versus could be as low as $40 for some cheap something. So to me, that's the more interesting part. I think that's the value.
Yeah.
As opposed to thinking about it. Landfill's interesting to think about and worth thinking about, but that's kind of why the Stitched on Patina Thunderdome bums me out. Is it does seem a little bit wasteful. Like I kind of wish there was a, hey, resurrect your old pair that you love event and wear those. Let's look at them today. And even though they haven't started off as new, let's take a look at these. Even they haven't already worn them. Let's see what they look like again in 6 months, or how about 6 years, right? I think that's where I'm at with these things. And I know like for that reason, I'm very behind in my footwear fashion, especially with this people that will be watching the show. I certainly don't have the coolest, newest stuff. And I sort of have the stuff that was pretty hip 12 years ago. So like a Roy boot, right? Or like an indie boot. Like I'm still stuck in that world, but that's just because they still have them and I still love them and they are fine. So I have a hard time buying new things, which is interesting. Speaking of buying new things, I don't know if this is too much of a tangent, but sometimes I think about the pandemic spending that happened when people were stuck at home. They had kind of nothing else to do than buy stuff online. And I think a lot of people bought footwear for those 2 years, maybe even still. It's my sense from just observing what I see, but also speaking with people, that things have slowed down a bit, even in the footwear world. And what got me thinking about this was my wife needs a new car. And I think the same thing happened in automobiles, and it's starting to make me think it might have happened in most categories. So I think many people bought a new car in the pandemic or a used car. Remember how expensive used cars were? And now, like we went to a test drove a Tesla, which was kind of interesting. We could talk about full self-driving. It was shockingly good for me. But they can't sell these cars. And like historically speaking, this electric vehicle is really inexpensive. So I wonder if people have sort of bought all the stuff they need over the pandemic and they're not picking up stuff anymore, which is kind of good, right? Like I think it's kind of cool that if people are satisfied with what they have and they can just keep wearing it. I don't know. I've just been thinking about that a bit, but talking about plastic, talking about leather, I think that to me is the key thing, is like how much use and value are you going to get out of the lifetime of that product? And less. I mean, certainly landfill's important to think about, but I think about that a little bit less than just like using everything I have to its full extent. I think people bottle the stuff, and it's going to be another one of those boat shoe indicator cycles where we're in a trough right now, and people might wear through that stuff and start picking up more things later. Or I could be completely wrong about all this.
No, I get that sense too. I don't know how. It's not like I don't haven't like sent any surveys out to like actually substantiate any of this, but that is sort of the issue at times with making a product that lasts a long time, where like you make something that's really great, that looks great, looks better as you use it, and lasts a long time, and you find a customer that loves it, and you sell them one of each color, and then they're kind of like done for 20 years. Like it's not the fast fashion model where something's changing every week and you're going to sell someone a new $10 whatever tank top with a different graphic on it because that's what you have this week.
Well, what sense are you getting are you speaking with any customers? Are they feeling like my thesis might be completely wrong? Like, no, things are kind of normal and we're selling a lot of shoes? Or is it a little slower?
No, I think it depends. I think it depends on. I think it depends. I think that some people have noticed things to be not quite as busy as they were. Yeah, but it's not across the board though. I mean, it's like certain people in certain places, certain companies, and I mean that could be. It's hard to point to what that is. I mean, that could be a style fashion shift too. It's like you sort of like you. If you sell boat shoes and boat shoes are great for 2 years and then all of a sudden they're not great, it's like, oh, business is bad. It's like, no, I mean, it is, but it's not. It's also like this every time. Like it goes up and down. And I think that people forget sometimes that, especially if you're in a company that's like has shareholders, like you don't really care about that cycle. You care that you're not making money. So
I guess what I wanted from you, Nick, is just maybe make the case of whether or not leather should be used for every product. Kind of sounds like we're not saying that.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I don't think it should. I think there are some places that it's great, and there are some places that it's less great, and there are a lot of things that come into play there. There's there's cost and there's consistency, which are probably the two that like another. That a customer or like a producer would look at. I mean, those two things are big in terms of like, how much does it cost to make the thing, or to make whatever you're going to make, and then how much of what I'm buying am I going to be able to use and not throw away? And I think that those two things are huge and drive a lot of at least the number crunching side of things. But when you start to get into everything else, I think that's where everything else matters. I guess, I mean, there's the performance characteristics, which I think we've talked about enough, but there's also the less tangible stuff. I mean, what does it look like and how does it smell, and is there nostalgia around it, and it's going to change. Is that a good thing? I mean, I think in many cases it is, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes you don't want something to change at all. I mean, you look at like a car interior. I mean, those were traditionally leather, and now those are basically plastic, and people have become accustomed to their car interior never changing. So I mean, that's a place that I don't think leather will ever get back into, because it's just not. I think that the cost sort of value proposition isn't really there anymore, at least with the customers that are looking at that product. But then you go into the easy example, which is the footballs, and I think that that's an easy one to find a differentiation in, because if you were to give someone the option between two, and one of them, and they're both exactly the same price, I think that the leather one gets picked 9 times out of 10. And if people knew that it was going to perform better, they would pick it every time. So at that point, it becomes just a cost issue. And I think that's where
we're not going to shock anybody by saying, "Hey, leather's expensive." I mean,
no.
But I think that is the theme here. Like, it's expensive. Maybe it's not the best from Phil's running shoes. But yeah, it's expensive. I mean,
it is expensive. It is expensive on day one. and this is what you were alluding to. But if you have, I don't know, if you have a pair of canvas, sneakers, and you have a pair of whatever leather boat shoes, and you go through, they're $80 sneakers, and the boat shoes are $350, and you buy a new pair of canvas sneakers every summer because they're blowing them on, they look gross, but you have those boat shoes for 15 years. I mean, at that point, it's not only is it better for, it's better for everybody that's other than the people that are making the sneakers, but at that point, it's better for your pocketbook, and it's better for the environment, and it's better for a lot of different things. But it's hard to.
Chuck Taylors look pretty cool. Is that where you?
Yeah, no, I'm not saying they don't look cool, and I wasn't even thinking of Chuck Taylors when you said that.
Okay, good. Also, natural material canvas.
Yeah, no, it is, and I'm not. That wasn't to say that wasn't any like. There are times where you're not going to want to wear boat shoes, and the Chuck Taylors are better. I mean, it's just like it's not to say you shouldn't have both, but I think that they're very different. And to say that like, oh, I'm just going to get one or the other, that's where things kind of fall apart in my head. But again, it's nuanced. Just do whatever you want.
Yeah,
that's the name of this podcast.
Just do whatever you want. All right. Well, I do think dollars per wear is something I think about a lot.
Yeah, me too.
Like my phone is the cheapest thing I own, and it was $1,000, right?
Yeah.
I use it so much.
It's amazing how much someone or people pay for something that they'll use like only a few times. And
like, you know what? People that complain to me like, hey, your wallet's like $100. I'm like, yeah, I get it. It's nice. We guarantee you forever. What did you do last night when you took your wife out to dinner? How much was dinner? It's like $200 to go to dinner. So it's like that was a couple hours, or you get this thing forever. So
yeah, I just think that it's interesting, and there's a lot to think about. And maybe I spent too much time thinking about it because because I'm around sheets of leather all day. But yeah. I guess that's why someone's listening to this. I always like the question and answer. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Stuff.
Well, yeah. If people want
to, I haven't looked in a while. I don't know if we have a bunch of questions or not. But
honestly, I haven't either. But yeah, dear listener, if you have a question for Nick or myself, or just for the community as a whole, we'll find the answer. You can email us or leave a comment on the video here. But the email address is fullgrainpodcast@gmail.com. Honestly, I've been better at reading the comments for the YouTube videos. So you might want to hit us up there for a better chance of it. I have a quick favorite, Nick. Did you want to go first with favorites today?
You can go ahead. I for the first time ever, I responded to a comment on a podcast.
One of ours?
Oh, Jesus Christ. Sorry. Did you hear that?
I sure did.
Edit that out. No, someone just had a comment on the last episode about calfskin, and I thought it was interesting. So I've been reading comments too, I guess is what I'm saying.
Read it out. Let's read it out. Shout them out.
Chris Lee 8888.
What
he he was just saying that calfskin makes him he's not sure how he feels about it, I guess, is the long and the short of it.
Honestly, I'm not either.
Yeah. No, I just said I appreciated him, or I mean anyone for that matter, like just saying that instead of just feeling a certain way and then finding a way to stay feeling that way by reading whatever on the internet confirms your opinion. But
yeah, it's weird. People used to eat a lot more veal, I would say. It was different. Quick favorites. I've been, again, obsessed with a game called Slay the Spire. Have you ever played that game, Nick? It's a roguelite deck building card game that's great to do passively because it's turn-based. So you can chill out, watch a movie or, watch a YouTube like I do, and then play a bunch of Slay the Spire. Basically, there's different classes of characters. So there's like a warrior or a rogue type of guy, and then there's like a wizard mage kind of person, and they all have different sets of cards and different abilities. But you go through this dungeon. I'll do a terrible job explaining this, but you go through a dungeon, and the gimmick of the game is it tells you what the enemy is going to do to you. So you use your cards to preemptively affect the rest of the round. And you go through different levels, and there's bosses at the end. You get extra cards. It's really fun. So I'm sure people here that are hearing this that have played Slay the Spire are like, hell yeah, I love Slay the Spire. It's the best. And then everybody else is like, that sounds really stupid. Trust me, it's great. What do you got, Nick?
I've got nothing again. I promise I'm gonna start to make a list of favorites of the day, and I'll next week I'll come with 2. How about that?
Okay. How about this? Best hot dog in the city. Go.
I don't know, the one at any baseball game. Doesn't really matter. Yeah.
Cubs? Wrigley?
Yeah. It doesn't matter. As long as you're at a baseball game, that always tastes better. Yeah.
Kids' grade school after school game? Yeah.
No. At a baseball, an MLB place.
All right. Right on, man. Thanks for setting up the episode. Everybody else, if you have questions, definitely leave them in the comments. We're itching to do a Q&A here. And until next time, hope you have a good one. See you, Nick.
Bye.